This week, our look at Jack Kirby's Fourth World continues with the first 6 issues of The New Gods. What makes this the most talked about series of the 4 Fourth World books? First, if you appreciate the work we do on Deconstructing Comics and our other podcasts, we'd love it if you'd support the show at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. Check out our goals and rewards and pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim.
This is Emmet.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Emmet in country Victoria, Australia. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Tim. How are things?
Okay. How are the millipedes?
The millipedes, haven't seen them.
Okay.
Haven't seen them.
That's good.
So there's been a pause, and as you and Kumar know, because I tweeted you during the week, I caught the bastard. I caught the kangaroo.
Yeah, surveillance footage of a kangaroo.
What's surveillance footage as I arrived home and I stepped out of the car and there he was. And we had a standoff because he was between me and the house. And it literally was, he went into the sort of crouching position. I was like, I'm going to die. But he then took off and leaped over a fence. Quite majestic.
Okay. Well, yeah, I haven't seen any kangaroos in the neighborhood. Saw a cat. That's about it. Lots of birds. Okay, so we are on to The New Gods, issues 1 through 6, following the comic book reading order. That's what you read too, right?
Yes, New Gods 1 to 6.
You sounded surprised, so...
No, because I was thinking about some of the discussion that the last episode elicited.
Yeah, Forever People.
I saw somebody commenting on who are these, because you summarized it as, Tim and Emmet actually find that there's a lot to enjoy about Forever People.
Yeah.
Despite...
Why isn't it more highly regarded?
Yes.
Yeah, and somebody said regarded by who?
Yes. And just this morning, I did some quick reading just before we did this. On like TV tropes, kept mentioning whenever the Forever People was discussed in the article, TV tropes are saying, widely condemned as the weakest of all of the New Gods books. Seen as at best cheesy. Right? I was going, that's my understanding. That it was just seen as an embarrassment. But of course, that sort of Forever People feeds into these 6 issues in terms of some of the concepts about Supertown and the young and the importance of the young and the anti-life equation, all that stuff. That's all here. So I feel the Forever People actually did a lot of the groundwork for what we're about to read. Mm-hmm. I do have 1 or 2 notes. There are times when a concept or an idea or a person is mentioned here that we've encountered in this reading order that website recommended. And it makes a lot more sense to me now, because this is the second time I've read these.
Right, yeah. It sounds like you had read New Gods before, but you hadn't read the other stuff.
Yeah, and I'll bring it, we'll get to it, I might bring it up, but there are passages in this comic that would have dearly, benefited from an editorial note. Read Jimmy Olsen issue 38 to find out what this is about. Like that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's mention of the wild area, which we haven't seen since early Jimmy Olsen run.
Yep.
There's a mother box, or 1 or more mother boxes in this from that we saw in the Forever People. Darkseid's in it, of course. Darkseid, his collaborator, who we didn't really talk about much last time, but was prominent in the Forever People. He shows up a little bit.
Yes.
So, although, about the mother box, I was kind of puzzled because now the mother boxes are smaller compared to what the Forever People had. So, is it like transistors? It's getting smaller now?
The Forever People seem to I feel like the Forever People are like Doctor Who, where the Doctor steals the TARDIS and runs off with it, and it's an unusual TARDIS. I feel like the Forever People have an unusual mother box, in that it's also connecting them with the Infinity Man, which is not something anyone else can do.
Ah, that's true.
And the Infinity Man is connected with the Source, which you find out here. The importance of the Source, and there's different artifacts like Highfather's staff that also have a connection to the Source. So there seems to be different objects, but mother boxes generally are portable. And in this issue, we also come across one of Darkseid's minions has a mother box installed in their helmet.
Mm-hmm.
So there's different versions of mother box.
Yeah. And yeah, the Source. So reading this, I was starting to get why Jack Kirby went to see Star Wars and recognized his own work in it, because there are some similarities. And I mean, who knows how much of this George Lucas had actually read, but I mean, could just be a coincidence to some extent. But yeah, there are similarities to Star Wars.
Yeah, Star Wars and New Gods are both at base space fantasies. They're works of space fantasy. So it's where you have that intermingling of magic and science technology at a sort of organic level. So I even on that level, you can draw all sorts of comparisons between them. The Source, the Force, Darkseid, obviously, the relationship between Orion and Darkseid, the relationship between Luke and Darth Vader. Many people have commented on this. Many people have also commented on how much Vader's design owes to Kirby's illustration of Doctor Doom. This has been discussed at length, and I find it unfortunate that New Gods, I would suspect, is most commonly known either as the origin for one of Superman's most famous villains, and B, a source of comparison with Star Wars. Mm-hmm. It's frequently discussed in relation to Star Wars. I think New Gods conceptually has a lot more going for it than Star Wars does. Particularly, I was trying to figure out the other day, how many Star Wars products are there out in the world at the moment? So you've got close to a dozen movies, more in fact, because you've got prequels and all these side quills and all these kind of movies now. You've got all these television shows, you've got all the animated shows. You're talking 30, 40 products, never mind all the books and comics and everything else. And the same concepts keep coming up. In New Gods and Forever People and Jimmy Olsen, from issue to issue, completely different concepts are
different concepts. Some different characters show up. Some characters disappear. There's so much in here. I mean, the Jimmy Olsen stuff was like, this is kind of crazy. Forever People was like, oh, there's symbolism here. I kind of get what he's getting at. And this, I'm kind of back to what? Because it's just so much, and some of it, I feel like he's attempting symbolism that I can't get. Although issue 6 I was kind of impressed with. Right. But the other 5 just seemed like kind of all kinds of random stuff is going on.
I mean, it is this idea of myth embedded in the everyday world that's really interesting. And the fact that the first issue opens with epilogue, I mean, that's amazing. It opens with epilogue. So this is Gotterdammerung, this is the death of the gods.
Yeah. Well, and this is the whole foundational concept of the fourth world, right? Because Kirby, when he was at Marvel, I guess there had been a story where Asgard was destroyed, or there was going to be, or they talked about it, and he had in mind like all these new gods who would come in and replace all the Thor characters, but decided that the way Marvel was treating him, they didn't deserve to get all this IP. And so when he got to DC, he decided to do it. So there is reference here to the old gods dying. They aren't named, but they're supposed to be the Thor characters.
Yes.
And then that first issue ends with what, prologue?
Prologue, yeah. I think it's incredible. But yes, you're right. It's the I think there's heavy allusions made to the Norse pantheon, but also the Greek pantheon. And he seems to be mainly drawing on those two. And some of the characters you can see are reformulated from those mythic characters we're familiar with. So I would put Metron closer to Odin in terms of Metron just seeks knowledge. That's all Metron's interested in. He's a trickster.
Trickster. Do you mean Loki?
No. Odin is a trickster. Odin is also a trickster.
I know, not in Thor comics, really, but...
No, but in the original myths.
Okay.
And Orion and Thor have a similarity. But like what's his
Ray?
name? Light Ray is like Hermes.
Okay.
You know, he travels at speed, and Highfather is like Zeus. So you've got these sort of connections, and the source is implied when all of the original gods died. The source reproduced these new gods. The source is sort of this engine for meaning, if you like, and births these concepts again and again. So there's these cycles of creation. So he's talking about the idea of the gods. He's also talking about the idea of superheroes. And then he's sort of merging these two things. And he's sort of saying, all right, writers and artists for DC, take this idea and run with it. But as we talked about last time, DC were like, no, you do it.
Yeah. I was glad to get a little bit of explanation of what we had seen in the Forever People, a definition of the anti-life equation, the outside control of all living thought versus the life equation, the right of choice is ours. So, and it all kind of ties back into that theme of anti-fascism. One side is, we have the right to control our own destiny versus somebody wants to take away all your control, all of your rights.
Yes. And I'm trying to find the quote as well. There's also, I think it's Highfather. Is it life? Was it life, flowers in freedom? Yes. Highfather, again, this idea of the young. The young must be allowed to develop and grow and experience life. So Highfather says they must remain free, Orion. Life, flowers in freedom. So that's your anti-fascism again, because fascism is about control and dominance and authority.
Yeah.
And that's what Darkseid's about. Darkseid on Apocalypse has total control over everything, but can't create. So everything just continues to rot and degrade and burn. And I think that's interesting. I read some discussion about Kirby's idea of the people living under Darkseid. He wasn't comfortable with the idea of them all being just evil. There clearly are people suffering, they're struggling, and they're trying to survive. And Mr. Miracle's all about that. But yeah, I think other writers who've dipped into this after Kirby, if they're from Apocalypse, they're evil because they're all corrupt. That's their take. Kirby wasn't saying that. I mean, Kirby was saying that under fascism there is still good, but it struggles to survive basically.
Now, the interesting point of this is that Orion secretly, he doesn't know it himself, but he's actually from Apocalypse. But he sees himself as being from New Genesis. But the face that everybody sees on him is not his real face. His face has been fashioned by the Mother Box, and once in a while we see his true face, which is a little more kind of caveman-like, more kind of mean-looking, not necessarily ugly, but certainly different from the face that he's normally wearing. But it was interesting that he doesn't know why he has that, why that's his real face, because he's from Apocalypse. He doesn't know that. I assume that in a later issue he must find out that, or at least Kirby intended for that to happen. I don't know if it ever did. We will see as we go on. But I thought that was interesting.
I read Simonson's Orion, and that was a big chunk of that. This idea of his his heritage. But I mean, he's aware that like he knows he doesn't look like other people from New Genesis. He knows he's different. He knows he's more violent. Metron sort of teases Highfather the fact that he knows why, because he's all about knowledge and power. But I did start to wonder. It's been a while since I read New Gods, so I'll continue reading after issue 6, which is where we're up to with this episode. But I was more of the opinion that I think he knows. I think on some level he knows what's going on with him and his nature. He may not know that he's Darkseid's child, and
Luke, I am your father.
Exactly. He may not know that, but I think he knows that he doesn't belong. But he chooses to live among New Genesis, and he loves his father, and he wants to be the son to Highfather, the best son to Highfather it could be. I find it interesting that because he is his things about using force and violence and strength to win, and there are passages in this series, as you mentioned in issue 6, with Light Ray, you have the idea of no, there's always there's another choice, there's another way. You don't have to do this. There's another option, and I like that. I like that idea of this character who's just so given to violence, but then his peers, the people around him, his family, are trying to show him another way to be. It's an interesting idea.
Now, you mentioned the sort of myth in everyday life. So the first several issues, we see these 4 humans who were kidnapped by Darkseid and taken to Apocalypse, and Orion rescues them, and then kind of works with them as sort of a gang, or some kind of operation against the Intergang, which, I don't know, we haven't really talked about Intergang, but I guess it's just like Earth people who are like criminal gangs who are working for Apocalypse.
Yeah, they know what Apocalypse is. They know it. They know they're aware of the relationship with the New Gods. Is it Sugarman later is commenting on it as well? Like he knows exactly what this is. So they're fully corrupt. And
the name keeps confusing me. Intergang. What does that mean?
Is it interdimensional gang?
Maybe.
So it's a gang that represents the interests of beings from another dimension. Intergang. That's my guess. I don't know.
Because intergang sounds like it just means between gangs.
Yes.
But yeah, maybe it's short for something.
But yes, Orion, or as he comes to be known as Orion. Like,
apostrophe Ryan.
Very Irish. He's hanging out with these 4 people who were captive on Apocalypse, and one of them, they're very white, very middle class,
and their dialogue is almost as stilted as the New Gods. I put this in my notes, quoting, "What about it, Lincoln? I'm Claudia Shane, simple but worried secretary. What am I involved in this time?" And then the guy says, "And me, young but cool Harvey Lockman."
"My name is Victor Lanza. I'm only an insurance broker."
Expository.
He mentions that he's an insurance broker a couple of times.
So a lot of their dialogue really had me rolling my eyes. I mean, at least the other, the New Gods characters, they're supposed to talk in a highfalutin way. But yeah, these guys, I don't know, just doesn't sound natural at all.
I love the way Orion talks to them. There is a being abroad here with powers beyond your wildest dreams. Darkseid is here. Like that's great.
By the way, I felt like Kirby put in a comedic moment without even quite realizing it. I think it's the beginning of issue 2. Darkseid in an office chair. I mean, that's just comedy gold, but it's not commented on at all.
Okay. So, I now have an apology. Some years ago, Kumar and I recorded an episode for this podcast all about Tom King and Mitch Grad's Mr. Miracle series, a book which I distinctly did not enjoy. And I think I made some aside where King really digs into that idea of ordinary, everyday life, and these new god characters sort of stuck in this almost situational comedy situation or television drama, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he sort of emphasizes this idea of ordinariness, which is actually a really interesting idea, and it's something that Kirby was doing here, because like there are scenes where, like we remember in Happy Land, Darkseid was just walking through Happy Land talking to people, and in this series, there's a panel where he's just like hanging around a corner, looking around the street. You mentioned him sitting in the chair.
Yeah,
that image has come up several times. Somebody comes home, Darkseid's just sitting there waiting for them in their living room, usually on a couch, because I think people realized, oh, he's quite heavy. I don't think a wooden chair, which is what he said here, would support him. Anyway, in that discussion with Kumar, I went off on some tirade about how Tom King's script was making a reference to it was the series before Final Crisis. I think it was Death of the New Gods, where Darkseid was sitting on Supergirl's couch, or was it Mary Marvel's couch? Mary Marvel comes home, and Darkseid's sitting on her couch.
Okay, reading TV guide.
Something like that, yeah. And I was going, oh, this is this reference to this. No, Kirby, this is here from the very beginning. Kirby does this. He's sitting there in this wooden, like, deck chair almost.
Or the scene I'm thinking of, it's like an office chair. I think he's actually in an office, just sitting in, the kind of cushioned desk chair.
You are right. It's actually an office space. But it's funny. And I think there is a sense of, I don't think it's necessarily unintentional. Because I think that contrast is being deliberately framed. Mm-hmm. And with Intergang, with these ordinary people forming an alliance with Orion, with Dick Turpin, you have this notion of, and Dick Turpin has that amazing speech. He's a police detective, but he has this amazing speech where he's talking about the super creeps. He says, those old times are back. They just look a little weirder, that's all. And
comparing to like Prohibition era or something.
Yeah, exactly. He's comparing gods fighting over this territory to a gang war. So Kirby is drawing this idea of ordinary life and mixing it up with this idea of new gods and evil gods and all the rest of it. I just felt that Tom King's approach and Dan Didio's approach with the Death of the New Gods was over-egging it so much that it just turned me off. Whereas for some reason here, I think it's hilarious, and I don't think it's necessarily unintentional. I think Kirby's in on the joke.
Okay. Interesting.
Coming up, the poetry of the situation set up in New Gods number 6 and more. This weekend on our Patreon page, my brother Paul and I discussed the time that King Tut was introduced into the regular DC universe. Nunzio De Filippis and Christina Weir wrote a King Tut story for Batman Confidential in 2009. This Tut is nothing like Victor Buono, and yet the story pays homage to the 1966 Batman TV series in subtle ways. And coming up on Patreon, our rotating cast looks at the artist transition on The Amazing Spider-Man from Steve Ditko to John Romita. Come join the fun by supporting us at patreon.com/deconcomics.
You like cheap comic books, right? Well, I'm Professor Allen, and I talk about cheap comic books on the Quarterbin podcast. In every episode, I'll dissect a single comic from my collection, as long as I paid no more than 25 cents for the issue. Forget about $4 new comics that you can read in 4 minutes, or crossover events that can cost $100 to collect. Join me in the Quarter Bin, where even bad comics are a bargain, and good ones are a steal. The Quarter Bin podcast is part of the Relatively Geeky Podcast Network. Visit us at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search Relatively Geeky or Quarterbin Podcast in iTunes. I guarantee it'll be worth every penny.
By the way, I forgot I was going to mention here. I want to correct something I said last episode. So I found that all of these books were bi-monthly. None of it was monthly, which makes sense because how is Kirby going to do a book a week, basically? So I guess it was like 2 books 1 month and the other 2 books the next month or something like that.
Right. So, okay. And the level of detail we're seeing as well. Like he's not half-assing it.
No.
But the appearance of Mantis in issue 2, is that setting up the events in Forever People? Like,
maybe. I guess Mantis was in there too. Yeah.
Because they were all in the city at the same time. It's just the Forever People didn't meet Orion. Because then we go into the Black Racer stuff. Mm-hmm. Which is a whole other storyline. So
well, it would be interesting to reread these in the order they came out, just to see how these things are kind of fitting together. That would be a bad way to do the podcast, I think. But but just for personal reading, it might be interesting to actually read them in publication order and see how they kind of weave in and out of each other.
Yeah, because again, that's another moment where the Marvel approach to editorial notes would have been quite helpful here, where you have Mantis appears in this reveal panel. The next page, you got the wild. Is it the wild zone?
Wild area.
Wild area. Thank you. That's where you have your little asterisks and go. Read this issue of Forever People. Read this issue of Jimmy Olsen. That's what he's doing. He's setting up these stories and these are the books, but there's no indication to the reader who maybe would only have picked this up.
Yeah, true. No footnotes at all.
No, unless I'm reading this digitally in a sort of republished DC collection for Comixology. Perhaps there was editorial notes and they've been removed from this. I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe, but I think that would be kind of hard to do without damaging the art. So
yeah, that was my only thought.
Okay, we need to talk about the Black Racer.
Yes.
Introduced in issue 3. And, of course, because he has black in his name, he's black. Yes. And he's the Grim Reaper. But he flies around on skis with ski poles. Like, I don't know where that came from. So
isn't it just another take on the Silver Surfer?
Yeah, I was thinking about the Silver Surfer. Yeah, it's the black skier or something. And the Black Racer is, well, he says that he was, kind of subconsciously summoned to this injured Vietnam vet, Sergeant Willie Walker, who can't talk, can't move because of his injuries. And Black Racer finds him. Yeah, he says, "In your despair, you summoned me." Suddenly, Willie can move and talk when Black Racer takes his hand, and then Black Racer crumbles, and then Willie becomes the new Black Racer. And I wasn't sure what the purpose of that change was. So now a different black guy is the Black Racer. Is there some sort of commentary there about Vietnam? About, I don't know.
Yeah. So yes. So he's a black soldier with all the hardship that would have entailed in the American military forces in Vietnam. He was gravely injured, and now he's paraplegic. His sister is basically stuck caring for him. They live in a poor neighborhood. The sugar man happens to be right outside his window when he sees him in bed and decides to kill him. And
yeah,
that's when
he,
the Black Racer
he witnessed something else that Sugar Man did.
And this man is he's got locked in syndrome. Basically, he can't speak, he can't move, he wouldn't have been able to testify.
Yeah.
It's not a Captain. Is it Captain Pike from the Star Trek situation? He's not.
Yeah. There's not even a blinking light.
Yeah, this is not going to work. But Sugarman was going to kill him anyway. Black Racer intercedes, and I think the implication is that Black Racer is saying, he's an anchor for him because only someone who's suffered that much and can, be a true sort of avatar for the Black Racer, somebody who really appreciates life and what it means to be alive. And I think that's the implication, but we don't have enough with him. And I found it interesting. I read about, because in the Forever People stuff, we didn't get to it, but there were these Deadman issues. And apparently Kirby really didn't like the Deadman stuff. He didn't like having to team up Deadman and the Forever People. He really resented it. And that Deadman is a character who possesses human bodies and then tries to solve injustice. Black Racer can go anywhere, do anything, take anyone because he's death.
Mm-hmm.
But he resides now in the body of this veteran paraplegic. So there is something again about this ordinary life and the divine, like connecting these two things, and how you can find the spark of the divine in like ordinary existence. And Black Racer seems to be a little more conscious of that than some of the other new gods are. They're traveling to Earth to fight on another front, basically. But he's like going, no, this is what life's all about. This is why I'm here. But yeah, he says, he does say to him, you will not live, you will die.
Mm-hmm.
But you will have what you have earned, the freedom of a great power. Does he mean he will eventually die, but he's going to experience, for the time that Black Racer is inhabiting him, all the things that Black Racer can guide him to? I'm not really sure what that means.
Yeah, that whole thing was kind of puzzling.
But yeah, he gets to walk and talk and do all these things. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
But his sister and her husband still see him as a paraplegic. When he's not the Black Racer, he's still, in bed and in, I'm not sure what he was in, some bandages, some traction.
Yeah. I do like the last page. Willie Walker's eyes grow wide. He is aware. He now knows his next quarry. Who is it? Him? Her? You? And he's looking right at you.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt like that was the kind of thing. I don't know if Stan Lee would have ever done that, but Kirby is bringing it like straight to the reader. You might be the next victim of this character.
But you're right to bring it up in terms of the reason why this story is here is so Kirby can talk about this black character who's just suffering this immense indignity. And, through the grace of this fantastical story element, he gets to experience, Willie Walker gets to see so much more of the existence. But at the end of the day, he's still stuck in a bed.
Mm-hmm.
There's something... this is where Kirby just fascinates me, because the prose is so leaden at times, but there's a poetic element to it.
Mm-hmm.
I keep coming back to that. There's some poetry at work here. This is where you've got the association of grand ideas and simple moments. And that can be a very poetic experience. Where he falls down is the insistence on over-explaining some things.
Mm-hmm.
Don't run for the exits. You can't escape the Black Racer. If there is still time, stay available for the next exciting issue. We're going to learn something about Orion's gang and the Deep Six. It's like, Jesus, cut half of those words.
Yeah, he's not the most elegant of writers, but
there's some genius there.
I have a question about a story point. I'm wondering what you made of this. So, I forget which issue it was, maybe 3 or 4. So, this Sugar Man guy, who is like basically straight out of a blaxploitation movie, he's a member of Intergang, and he's in a truck that's carrying a bomb that he's going to set up somewhere. And then Black Racer kind of intercepts him and he can put his ski pole through the side of the truck, and it touches the bomb, and it start making a sound, and then the truck starts flying. And Black Racer says that he's turned on like the anti-gravity on the bomb, and it's causing it to float up. But then we see Orion, who has a mother box, and he's also taking credit for the truck flying and the bomb blowing up in the sky. And so I'm like, well, who really did that? Was it Black Racer or was it Orion?
I think Black Racer literally just gave it a nudge. I think that's what's happened there. He's literally just tipped the scales in Orion's favor.
Okay.
And Orion, what Orion observes is, oh, well, my mother box did that, and that's what happened there. But I think Black Racer was sort of that sort of divine element that just moves things, or like a guardian angel almost. Just giving a little helping hand here or there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I wonder if that was my reading of it.
So I was noticing how Orion has no hesitation about killing people, including members of the Deep Six.
Yes.
And I realized, I think in issue 6, I think that's part of that is because he's from Apocalypse. Because when he and Light Ray encounter that creature that's inside the craft on the ocean, and we'll get to the whole issue 6 thing, Light Ray steps in and says, no, don't kill it. We need to change it. And he changes it into something that serves New Genesis. And so I thought that was, the fact that he's killing is not just, for the story, but it's a commentary on his
nature,
background. Yeah, his nature.
Yeah. And also he's given to vengeance. So we don't meet, but we witness another new god. Sigrin?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think, Sigrin. Sigrin. So that's a reference to, I want to say, German myth, but he's a sea god. He's like Manannán mac Lir or Poseidon or any of the sort of European sea gods, and he's already been to Earth and he's encountered the Deep Six and he's been killed. And Orion basically gives him the equivalent of a Viking funeral and destroys the dock. So that's him. He's all about passion and vengeance, and this is his sort of take on things. But Light Ray's commentary in issue 6 about what happens to that pacifist, there's this idea of, oh well, when you die, you return to the source, and then you'll come back again, or the source will reinvent you, or there will be some sort of a version of you that reoccurs in the cycle. And like I was looking at my notes as well, and there's something I'd forgotten, which is that the boom tube technology that Metron created for Darkseid, that was originally the Bifrost. Mm-hmm. So the Bifrost was destroyed in the Götterdämmerung event, and then Metron rebuilt it as the boom tube. So things keep getting recycled. Mm-hmm. And the New Genesis people their philosophy is that life will find a way, we will return, things will work out. The Darkseid forces are all about control, power, death to anyone who opposes you. And Orion is sort of ping-ponging between these two philosophies.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about issue 6, because, you were talking about how there's a poetic quality to it, and I felt like the story in issue 6 especially had this poetry to it. So Orion is out flying on his astroglider and, looking for the Deep Six. And by the way, Deep Six, I'm not sure if this is a reference to a North American expression. I'm not sure if you know what Deep Six is punning on.
Is it so? Deep Six, I think it means to to kill or to knock somebody out?
Well,
in a boxing match?
To deep six something means to destroy it or get rid of it.
Right.
And I thought that was the cleverest name that we've seen Kirby come up with in any of these books. I really appreciated that one.
Is it a reference to death charges?
Well, yeah, I looked it up, and it has to do with something I didn't quite understand, but measuring of fathoms in the water.
Yeah, that's why I thought of death charges.
And also kind of ties in with, burying someone 6 feet under.
Yeah. Hence, I was thinking of death or, somebody getting knocked out.
So, you talk about like deep sixing evidence that'll work against you or something. Anyway, so he's out looking for the deep six in the ocean, and he finds this life raft where a rich guy and his 2 grown children have been floating around for some days, I guess, after their yacht was destroyed. And
yes, Orion finds a metaphor in a raft, a metaphor for American society and the debate over pacifism.
Right. Well, yeah, the son Richard is a pacifist, and his father Farley Sheridan is a war veteran who fought them on the beaches in Normandy. And then
he calls his son a marshmallow.
Yeah. And Farley's daughter, Lynn, is there. These are both grown children.
She's a centrist.
Yeah. And then what ends up happening, there's a lot of other stuff, but they end up faced, when Orion and Light Ray are off looking for the Deep Six, one of them comes up on this weird craft that Orion has moved them to from their life raft. Yeah, this guy Jafar, and is this Aladdin or something?
Sounds like Aladdin, yeah. And
Jafar is threatening the father, Farley, and then Richard steps in to fight to protect his father, and is killed by Jafar. And so we get this kind of switch where the pacifist ends up, in spite of what his father said about him, fighting to protect his father and giving his life. And then the father is like blaming himself because he didn't fight. He thought that he would be the one who would fight and stand up for himself, and he didn't. But then also, now I'm not sure if this is eye-rolling or great, but when Jafar kills Richard, he wraps his hand around Richard's head, and his head becomes this like silver mannequin head with no face. And then when Light Ray and Orion come back, Light Ray says, "The skirmish with Jafar has finally ended a quarrel and decided an issue. It also created another faceless hero." And I thought that was a really good pun. And some kind of symbolism there. And then, Richard they aren't able to revive him, but through some machinations that I didn't completely understand, he's able to at least get his face back to be, identified, you could say.
Yeah. So, like, as you said, you mentioned before, like, Light Ray found that the Deep Six, the enemies from Apocalypse, had taken New God's technology and turned it into this sort of perverse, half animal-like thing, and he purifies it and he turns it into what is a sort of version of what it originally was, and he's placed Richard beside it, where singing atoms are forcing a new ending to this day. Like, this is like high metaphor here now. So yeah, this device is basically literally a plot device now. Like, this is now the engine of the story, the noble sacrifice. A recurring idea as well is all the technology that we encounter in New Gods is intelligent, has personalities. Like, they all have a sense of who they are as devices. So I did wonder if placing Richard beside the device was giving maybe a sense of life to it as well, that Richard's spirit was, again, this idea of self-sacrifice was again going to be a part of what happens next, that, that same urge to defend at the expense of one's own life then becomes part of the device's own nature. So it's there's a lot of exposition and there's not enough exposition. This is where the disjunction between poetry and prose starts coming to effect.
Mm.
And then they send off the daughter. Just go.
Women are to be protected, and she's just put on the astroglider and sent off to quote unquote safety. And then at the end, so the father is left tied to the mast of this craft, and it seems like Orion and Lightray just kind of leave him there.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of Odysseus being tied to the mast. Because Odysseus wants to hear the song of the sirens. So he forces his crew to block their ears and row, but he wants to hear it. Mm-hmm. He wants to experience it, so he is tied to the mast.
Yeah, that's probably what Kirby is thinking, because otherwise, why would you tie him to the mast?
I think that's what this is. And he's sort of, this guy who loved war gets to see God war here. And he's just left to witness it. But he's lost his son, and his daughter's left him. So that's the punishment almost.
Yeah.
Similar to how we thought Kirby was reinventing the Arthur myth in Fur People, I think this is Odysseus here.
Yeah.
Oh, even that, Christ, Jesus, let's even walk through it again. Even the fact that Odysseus is a war veteran who's going home from the Trojan War. This guy is a war veteran from Normandy, and like he's still trying to relive his past, even now he's got a family that he should be a loving father to, and not like condemn them as marshmallows. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it keeps bringing up something that I keep forgetting to mention on the podcast, but like how much is Kirby's World War II experience influencing what he's putting in these books?
Well, I mean, again, that brings us back to the idea of ordinary life and grand epic. Like, Kirby had this very ordinary existence, if you like. I mean, he had pretty extraordinary early life, but if you grew up in the streets and then you're sent over to the European theater to fight on this scale, that maybe he was drawing connections between what he remembers from being in a gang and then what he experiences being in the army and facing the German soldier, and in that biography we reviewed. The
Scioli book. I mean, it doesn't hold back on the crap that he saw in World War II. It was pretty rough.
So he probably was seeing like everyday cruelty on the street, and then horrific cruelty in Europe in war, and going, wait, these two things are connected. I've been bringing it up since we did the Jimmy Olsen thing, but the sort of the minimal to the maximal, I think that's his grand metaphor. Like this idea of the petty cruelties you see in everyday life are the same. They're behind the same actions of grand violence that you witness in war. It's the same pettiness, the same vindictiveness at work.
Maybe that's the whole point of intergang, because you got these kind of just regular crooks, gangsters, but they're serving this much larger evil.
Yes, and it also brings us back to Happy Land again, because you cited the bit where Darkseid confronts the dad, and he says, "Oh, he doesn't realize I'm his true face."
Yeah,
it says it's that idea again. Like Darkseid knows that the petty lives of these people around him, they're no different from the lives of these gods that he walks among. It's like you're acting out the same dramas, the same sort of stories of vengeance and injustice and all the rest of it, but it's just at a smaller scale.
Yeah.
But what we witness in the next, is it page 24 and page 25? I mean, one of the more dubious aspects of the image revolution in the 90s was this idea that they were calling attention to the fact that they were the true inheritors of Jack Kirby, right? To the point where in issue 5, we have the Spawn font in issue 5. It's the same font that Todd McFarlane uses.
And
Spawn.
the same character name.
Yes, exactly. It's incredible. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. I was like, wait, whoa, what is this? In this issue, which is it's a double-sized issue, on pages 24 and 25, I can see the image generation looking at the art in these 2 pages and going, that's a 2-page spread. Those are 2-page spreads there. No, Kirby just has 1 page with the Apocalypse Deep Six characters and their Leviathan going up against Light Ray and his repurposed Apocalypse device that's now got the soul of Richard imbuing it, that's sending them to the source. And they're really impressive pages. The art's beautiful, but you kind of want it to be bigger. And I can see the image people say, no, that's a 2-page splash.
I was a little confused by the character Metron. It didn't seem like he was kind of on anybody's side, or like he just kind of doesn't care about the whole war.
There are moments where I feel like Metron is almost line for line giving the same dialogue as Littlefinger from Game of Thrones. That's basically what Metron is. Knowledge is power. That's all Metron's interested in. He sees himself as a disinterested observer, but like he will tip the scales every now and then.
Yeah, he says, I think in the first issue, he cares only about what makes the universe run, not who runs it. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's fascinated with the source. He wants to get beyond the source. And this is something that's become, I think that's really interesting, but this is something that's become quite flat in later versions of Metron. I apologize for keeping bringing up, here's how the New God's been messed with since Kirby. But yeah, the idea of Metron as being sinister and being like, he becomes one note. He just wants to break through the source wall. That's all he wants to do.
Wow.
There's a lot more to Metron. He's not just that. But yes, that is an aspect of him. If he doesn't know something, he needs to know.
So, yeah, just kind of thirst for knowledge, but it's sort of amoral.
Yes. But, it's still at the same time, the implication is like Darkseid calls him out as well, but like he is going to get involved. He can't pretend that he's above it all. The reason I compare him to Odin before is because like Odin is the character who sacrificed his eye so he could learn about the apocalypse, about a god of Damarung, Ragnarok. He gives his eye so that he can prepare. He needs the knowledge, and the sort of implication is that he's actually caused injury for the sake of that knowledge, but the knowledge is more important to him. And I think Metron is similar in that respect.
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to digest here, and I'm not sure that and I think, my knowledge of myth is subpar, so it caused me to miss some things, but I'm not sure if this is necessarily good, but it's certainly interesting.
I enjoyed the little backup stories as well. Like, we didn't touch on it, but the Young Gods of Supertown. Is another like the Lonar stuff, and that we've talked about in the previous. But there's one featuring a character called Fastback, who is this speedster character. He's got a key icon in his helmet, which is an interesting one, and it turns out he's also an amazing musician. But Fastback likes to be mischievous, like all these young gods, and he's racing around the city, and the sort of Supertown version of the police are trying to catch him, and he's causing a nuisance, he's causing a fuss, and he also inspires other young gods to race him as well. Like they're all trying to be better than him. We talk about Kirby, we talk about how he anticipated some modern technology, how the mother box is a lot like the smartphone. On page 2 of this backup story with Fastback, I swear to God, one of these young gods is riding a peloton.
Yeah, I guess I subconsciously sort of noticed it seemed like some kind of exercise equipment that he was riding on.
Like, that's what that is. It's a peloton.
In 1971.
In 1971, yeah. But I'd like the language again that Kirby has here. Youth and its flamboyant fads against the serenity sought by the structure. I love this stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, he seemed to be really interested in the kind of the generation gap business at the time. Of course, I mean, that seems to have resulted in the take on Forever People that he's just trying to get with the kids and he doesn't get it and it's embarrassing or something. But yeah, I don't know. We got something completely different from the Forever People, but
yeah, I mean, that's a sort of knee-jerk, just reactionary hatred of hippies that was at work there, I think, as witnessed most recently in Quentin Tarantino's Not Quite Hollywood, which I did not enjoy. Not Quite Hollywood is not the word. That's the Australian documentary. It's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Sorry.
Yeah.
But I recommend Not Quite Hollywood to anyone if you're out there and you haven't seen it yet. It's a great documentary. Tarantino's in it. But he didn't direct it. I really enjoy this idea of how New Genesis is so concerned with the youth and giving them space to experiment and change things up. And the city almost looks like a fairground, and there are some passages in this book. There is a early issue where a character is standing beside what looks like abstract art as well. Kirby seemed to be looking around at what was happening and just going, this is all great. This is like, this is the good kind of futurism, not the Italian fascist futurism. This is like, let's just break the old and come up with something new. And that seems to be the whole ethos behind the New Gods, starting with an epilogue. This is what's next. This is the next thing that's happening. And that runs through all of the new fourth world stuff we've seen. So the New Gods from the Forever People, even the Jimmy Olsen stuff where you had these kids going toe to toe with evil gods and surviving, and telling Superman where to go. There is this idea of youth and freedom and just being allowed to find yourself, and that's I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, it's been quite interesting, both to kind of see what was on his mind and to see what he took or didn't take from working with Stan Lee.
Yes.
As I was editing this, I had to slap my forehead as I realized that the Black Rider can be taken as symbolic of how African Americans served their country in wars and yet were handicapped in terms of the opportunities available to them in society when they came back. I would guess we'll come back to this point when we return to the New Gods. New Gods is published by DC. You can help the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics, and go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Next week, more Fourth World as we move on to the first 6 issues of Mr. Miracle. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.